Hello and welcome. Today we talk about religion and literature. Now, this is a topic which is slightly different from what I have covered so far. The idea here is to understand basically the relationship between religion and literature, and because religious studies and religion is also coming back within literary studies and literary theory, it is important for us to go back to the relationship, to study and understand the relationship between literature and religion. And here I would be also talking about religion and literature in the Eastern as well as the Western context, and in particular I talk about how we should be treating academic disciplines of religious studies and literary studies. So first of all, how do religion and literature interact with each other? The first similarity between religion and literature is that essentially both are about the human condition and human life. And so both literature and religion help us build empathy, help us build morality, become in a way better human beings and a better society. Whether this really it translates into a better society or no, the idea behind religion is to be able to empathize with people who are like us, empathize with other human beings, be able to understand life, be able to understand the meaning of suffering, the reasons for the life the way it is, and we ascribe meanings to it. So and so does literature. So in a way, religion and literature are very much doing the same thing. But it's just that despite the overlap, we can say that as a discipline, as a system, religion does predate literature. And so in the Western context, let me first talk about the Western context, and then I'll go back to the Western context once I've described a few things for the Eastern context as well. So for the Western context, literature has became important initially because religion was inadequate to describe the human condition, and religion was inflexible. The church was somewhat inflexible when it came to people expressing their feelings about life. And the ambiguity and the complexity of human life was not simply either described by religion or described only by literature. Both had to exist for people to derive meaning from it. And many would argue that religion has a literary aspect and literature similarly has a theological dimension, and there is therefore there has been always a certain overlap. And therefore, because of this overlap, many canonical and non-canonical texts engage extensively with religious ideas. So literary texts would very often talk about religious ideas, and the development of English literature, and for that matter any other language literature, as a discipline began with an explicit consideration of the relationship between religion and literature. And so therefore much of early English literature had a religious undertone. And for instance, if you have to read the early novels, the first novel, say John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, which is a 17th century work, right? And if you go back to very recently 20th century writer Graham Greene, if you have to read him, you would not be able to extricate that work from religion. You will not be able to understand or appreciate these works without an understanding of the Bible or without an understanding of Christianity. Similarly, if you have to appreciate or read Bhakti poetry or any other religious poetry for that matter, or Sufi poetry for that matter, you need to have a great knowledge of religion. Likewise, so authors have always been asking and answering questions about human existence, just like religion. And for a moment, let me take you to the Indian context and describe this overlap between religion and literature in the Indian context. First, let me talk about how religion or Hinduism, how its structure is different from Christianity. Now, in Christianity, all rites of passages, all rites of passage or rules of hygiene, basically the rules governing human life, are decided by the church, right? So So you are either a Christian or you're not a Christian by virtue of belonging to belonging to Christianity, right? Belonging to the church or following the church. This is a distinction which does not exist for Hinduism. In Hinduism, the ethical moral world, soteriology, that is your understanding of life, afterlife, philosophy, basically, that is one system. And caste system is another, which decides the rules of hygiene, ethical and moral well-being. So where to go, where to worship, how to worship, all those rules are also in a way described by your caste. And your morality, your your the way you understand your life and afterlife, to a great extent, it's defined by the ethical moral system within Hinduism. So these two strands actually form one system, and caste system actually between the two is more rigid, and you can not belong to two castes simultaneously, whereas you can be a Buddhist and simultaneously be a Brahmin, in a way that you're born a Brahmin, but you can also follow Buddhist practices, go to follow Buddhism, follow the tenets of Buddhist philosophy despite being born a Brahmin. So there is a certain flexibility with the ethico-moral aspect of Hinduism, which you do not find in Christianity or other monotheistic religions. So this is a very very surface level difference between how Hinduism is different of much of Eastern religion is different from Western religion. So this is clean and clear difference between religion and religiosity in the Indian context compared to the West. So for the West, there are categorical entities. You're either a Christian or you're not a Christian. You either follow the church or you do not follow the church, right? The things that we've been reading in English history, and so these kinds of gatekeepers are different when it comes to Eastern religion or Hinduism in particular. Now, having made this distinction, let's come back to talking about religion and literature. So the questions that religion has asked have always existed, and religion and literature have always interacted. And going further back into the Indian context, if we look at Bhakti poetry, for instance, or if we look at poetries of devotion, it would be difficult to say whether it's literature or whether it's religion, right? If you've read Hindi literature even in school, you would have read Kabir, or you would have read Tulsi, right? Tulsidas. While these are poets who have extensively dealt with questions about ethics, questions about human life, and they are very easily associated with religion. You have a Kabir Panth, you have Tulsidas, whose poetry is read in every other North Indian temple, and despite doing that, they are very much poets. They are very much authors of great literature. So this division between religion and philosophy or religion and literature has never been tenable in the Indian context. In fact, you can't even today, it's very difficult to demarcate religion from literature, even in the current context. You can't say whether if you're reading Kabir's Dohas, you're reading religion or you're reading literature, or whether you're reading even when you read Tulsidas, the kind of form, the kind of meter that he's using, it's very much of interest to students of literature. So both follow the rules of form and meter, and in fact tellings and renderings from Ramayana and Mahabharata are very much informed by social history. So through stories of Mahabharata, we have been able to talk about availability of resources in India and the kind of people, the kind of lives people have lived in the past, and also the food they've eaten. So this watertight compartmentalization of how do you demarcate religion from any other discipline for that matter is very, very difficult when it comes to Hinduism. So literature and religion have always overlapped. We have created these academic disciplines, but literature doesn't necessarily have to be non-religious, right? And religion can also be very speculative, like Kabir's poetry can be very, very speculative, right? So we have created these distinctions which confuse us, and especially it confuses young students who start studying literature in the first place. So literature and religion have overlapped, and in the Indian context, and even today, we are unable to form clear distinctions between literature, religion, and philosophy. Having covered now this part about Eastern philosophy, let's get back to the Western condition and the Western context. And let's see where we go with the academic disciplines of religion and literature in the current times. Now, at the turn of the 20th century, it was widely believed that, especially by political theorists of the West, that once the world gets modernized, once people's lives, once industrial revolution becomes more, and it spreads out more and more. Once the agrarian society gives into an industrial society, religion will take a back seat and retreat into private lives. And these many philosophers started relegating religion into a private sphere, and especially in the 19th century. Especially with Darwin's theories about survival of the fittest, the church became weaker, as we may have read in our the history of the Victorian era, and slowly people started thinking in the late 19th century and in the early 20th century that religion is slowly becoming irrelevant. And this was also a time with world wars, and people did not have the same kind of faith in religion the way they had in the previous centuries. And so many authors, many literary theorists also say that rise in English studies or rise in literature studies was because what they felt was a failure of religion. But how do we look at the world now, after 100 years after those modernist writers have also written and gone? I'm talking about early 20th century. But we've kept seeing through the 20th century many so-called secular authors also kept asking questions about religious themes, right? So Beckett, for instance, or Shaw, for instance, and many others have asked questions. Walt Whitman, they've asked questions which have been of interest to religion as they are of interest to literature. So, Walt Whitman was much earlier. I was talking about 20th century. But the idea is that many authors have actually, despite becoming secular, they ask the same questions. So as we moved further and once the world advanced, we've been seeing that religion is not retreating. In fact, religion has become more and more important for people's lives. It's not retreated to a personal sphere, or it is very much a part of the public sphere. And so the assumption that modernity would lead to social change and make religion weaker is being contested increasingly by scholars, and many scholars, and for one important scholar in this aspect is Jose Casanova, who has argued that we may have to revisit modernity and the sociology of modernity in order to understand its relationship with religion. It doesn't do much harm to religion. It has not really ended religion as many people have expected. So now what we talk about these days is post-secularism. The idea that post-secularism is a term which reflect on religion's move back into the public sphere and the need to take account of the voice of religious actors in any contemporary analysis of society. Now, any part of society, we have now started taking religion as a very important aspect of modern life, which was not a part of Western philosophy some decades ago. And this ideological turn has also shown a literary theory, and we've now started looking at religion much more seriously than we had done earlier. Now, looking at this great change that has existed and that is a part of the world now, we have to accept the fact that religion is an integral part of any society, and it's very evident with the socio-political scenarios world over. So for instance, when we look at hyper-religious societies, and we look at religion as increasingly overlapping with our consciousness of nationalism, we have to now start taking note of religion and religious studies whenever we look at any other discipline, be it sociology, be it history, be it literature, and be it economics. So religion is a part of your public sphere, and it needs a very serious consideration. And religion can no more just be looked at as from the earlier Marxist lens, where you thought that religion was just an opium of the masses, something which is just something which is just a burden on society. That's not how we look at religion anymore. Rather, today, interdisciplinary studies of religion are the need of the hour. And finally, literature is never exclusive. It always reflects, and it always reflected religious attitudes of people it represents. So in a way, it is time now to treat both religion and literature as interdependent academic disciplines, and to not really treat them as exclusive academic disciplines. So this was a very short presentation on religion and literature. I would make another presentation sometime soon. See you again. Thank you.